I always knew that I wanted to organize other people towards a more just society. It made sense to me. It actually felt like a clear obligation, non-negotiable. While my family was devoutly apolitical, the family lore was not. My father grew up with Jews in hiding in occupied Holland. My grandfather was incarcerated under the Nazis. Their stories of leadership and resistance inspired my sense of duty. But I often wondered, what if the resistance had started earlier? Could the need to pick up guns have been avoided? I still find it a fundamental question and relevant today. My childhood holidays included relatives who arrived in this country as refugees from the Russian and Nazi pogroms. Their stories were whispered in snippets when they left the room. The take-home message to my generation was, hear this and stay out of trouble. Our family followed the news, voted, but did little more. I did want to stay out of trouble. I was a very good girl. But the family lore kept me puzzling out my role in this world. I knew that I did not have the courage for war. My poor tolerance for snowball fights seemed an early indicator. But I was sneaky enough to see a role for me in building a resistance movement well in advance of any violent crisis. In the early days of the ROP, myself and an activist nun from Cornelius were on a radio show where she easily declared the human dignity groups a resistance movement. Ha, I thought. As a schoolgirl, during the years of heated East Coast integration, I started to notice a disconnect between liberal talk, we are all equal, be nice to everyone, and liberal action. I was pulled from my public school when the violence escalated. At my new private school, a few vetted blacks studied with privileged whites. That was the type of liberal action I wondered about. Integration was good, in theory. With Harriet the Spy as my mentor, I observed the world. Without the language of isms, I got that being nice to everyone was very different from being fair. I got the caste system. It seemed that equality meant little unless you shared the wealth, and that was definitely not happening. Maybe I would have forgotten my personal commitment to organizing, but my junior year in college, I got a big knock on my head. Living on another continent, kidnapped and raped, then denied access to medical care, police, or the courts. That is, until an amazing thing happened. The women of this town found me. These women lived amid an epidemic of rape where reporting just made their woes worse. But they had developed a strategy. When I spoke up, a naive 19-year-old trained by TV movies of the week featuring what to do if raped, that so saturated US 70s culture. Well, they were waiting for just such a public incident. With only a vague newspaper description of me, they divided up the town and went door to door until I was found. They needed me, and they knew that I needed them. 9 months later, they organized a huge court watch that resulted in a landmark verdict in my case. I learned the importance of having a strategy. These women weren't multitasking from event to event. Their community had a serious problem, and they were committed to addressing it in a long-term way. Women bravely overflowed that courtroom because they knew the repressive culture demanded that enough women show up to make each individual less at risk. Here was the grassroots building power through their numbers. I learned the importance of numbers. And I learned to see this community takeover of one trial as a critical part of a larger strategy to expose and eliminate the abuse of women. That landmark trial did have immediate resonance for this town, despite a gag order barring the papers from covering the verdict. Kind of a pre-Twitter moment. 15 years later, that country's national legislature passed a law that said no woman could be raped if she was wearing jeans. That law was overturned, but justice for women stays a journey that no one trial could resolve. This is a critical point to be reminded of, for our fast-paced society is used to instant gratification. No wonder so many are crushed by Obama's questionable performance. So why share all this? First, I come from the powerful feminist tradition of your story being a political act. I became political because of stories. I stay political because of stories, and not the queued up version heard in politicians' speeches. In addition, as Kara and the ROP design their wings for these times, I, as part of the root system, want to remind us of why ROP has prioritized long view organizing for change, why growing a base that we are in active relationship with is how we measure progress. We have never had significant faith in short-term policy success. Suzanne Farr once observed that ROP was built on three notions. Every person matters no matter where you live. All issues are connected, and that only through organizing that is transformational can we expect to change the rules of this world. The latter point is reflected in ROP's commitment to be grassroots, not just in our base, but in how we function. A small budget requires less distracting administration, and better yet, requires a genuine reliance on a volunteer culture. To own your organization, to struggle with each new issue as it gets connected in, to truly share our stories transforms us, and then we can better transform the world. In these times where civic participation is seen as so critical to progressive success, I think it is of value to study the movements of resistance. Sometimes you participate, and sometimes you resist. When ROP started in the early 90s, it was in resistance to the right being the sole out-loud voice in our communities. It was also in resistance to an urban-based progressive infrastructure that saw little value in rural America. We set out to change those two realities by building up our own infrastructure, what we called human dignity groups. By resisting first, we built the infrastructure we needed in order to participate. As I look at the political landscape of 2010, I wonder what there is to participate in at times. But that is a larger conversation than tonight's celebration. I haven't organized since late March. I define my organizing, the work that makes me occasionally seem smart and wise, as needing to include consistent cold contact with unknown people to see if they are warm or hot, and then to build a relationship accordingly. Always with a database, of course. ROP decides who is warm or hot, not by where they drink their coffee or how they look, but by the spark in their eyes when we approach divisive and often manufactured issues of the day with common sense. Two immediate projects were impacted as I headed to Cancerland versus the Road last April. One was a meeting that had been in the works since the Tea Party Town Hall the prior summer. The Town Hall in St. Helens was a carnival of poor behavior, with the exception of Causa. The heated atmosphere had the fire department deputized to maintain calm. It was a type of crowd I could easily imagine attacking each other with pitchforks in another era. Healthcare being the excuse. We talked, a long-time head of the hard religious right approached me. We talked for over an hour, troubled by the jeers of both sides. Joe and I didn't agree on health care or immigration, but we were able to refocus and say, wouldn't it be cool to have a sane discussion on how this one community may make sure that everyone had health care and that every worker's rights were honored? Not surprisingly, we both agreed on those values. And so I took the lead role in bringing together good thinkers that would maintain these values, but not be falsely partisan in problem-solving real issues. Our first meeting was finally going to happen. It took that long. I was sad to see missing what a conversation focusing on building a resilient community across lines could mean to our community. The other project that I dropped was a road trip through the most conservative and isolated counties of rural Nebraska. Unlike my work in rural Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, there was little familiar in rural Nebraska. I was deeply challenged to find a starter few sentences that would keep a prospect on the phone with me. Constructing this road trip refreshed memories of how ROP started, the endless hours of cold calling to find people that would just talk to me. In 2010, I was again starting from scratch. What were the effective opening, middle, and closing lines that would connect me to these unknown people I was calling? I was asking them to stay on the phone with me, to consider hosting a gathering, as well as to find a home to lodge me in. They weren't at all impressed that I was from small-town Oregon. It only works here. I was trolling for innovative thinkers and leaders. Who was sparking in community banking? What about the safety net programs, the Rotary, or the Chamber of Commerce? It was a daunting process to fill a 5-day journey with morning, afternoon, and evening stops, let alone find the community housing so core to deeper relationships. But it happened. Unknown prospects became hosts, empty days became too full, and my time in rural Nebraska promised quite the adventure. When I contacted them to cancel, these barely known people dotting hundreds of miles between them set up prayer circles while pushing for a rescheduled time. The regret was palpable. One director of a small town chamber of commerce said she had never had the opportunity to be a part of something so exciting. We hadn't even met. She hoped. It only gets better. She hoped I could reschedule soon. There is a hunger out there. It is a hunger that ROP is designed to feed. In both of the above instances, it was values that created a bridge. I could say more about all of that, but I won't. What do I wish for the wings? That the roots give them the stability to use their creativity, fresh eyes, and fresher dispositions to say, what do these times need? And then to follow those instincts boldly, with a little bit of feisty thrown in. I would wish more, but the truth is, this team has its wings. They have soared this past year. They have my heart, they have my volunteer hours, and they truly have my respect. Kara Schufelt is who I wish I was. I see myself in her, but she has a genuine comfort with herself that gives her a whole lot more time to focus on the needs of the world. She is a gift to all of us, and thank you, Brenda, flown in from Michigan, for raising such a person. I haven't seen many of you since the Rural Caucus and Strategy session when I was mid-diagnosis fearing lung cancer. Well, the good news is that I don't have lung cancer. The bad news is that I do have metastasized cancer in my lungs. Dang. Statistically, I am doomed, but there are exceptions, and being amid strong community and being fit do mean a lot. But I have been handed my pink slip from this world. The thing is, Mike and I are doing just fine. It's hard, but we are very happy and very hopeful. Early on, I wrote a little test obituary. It said, Marcy Westerling, a kick-ass community organizer, dedicated to the notion that small-town Americana is filled with justice-seeking souls that deserve support, as well as have the power to bridge the false cultural divides of our times. Derailed by stage 4 ovarian cancer in spring of 2010. I trust others to continue moving rural, inclusive, progressive organizing forwards. The only thing I would change is inserting a momentarily before derailed. There is a lot to be done on this journey called life and this journey towards justice. Count me in. Thank you.